In this video, we'll have a look at some of the muscles of the torso, shoulder, and the upper arm. And we'll really focus in on the ones in our lab book. So this would be section B in your muscle lab. So let's start to have a look. So we're simply going to go around, have a look as to where they're located and get some sense as to their anatomy. So let's start off with the pectoralis major. Now think of that name. Pectoralis tells you it's in the pectoral region. Major tells you it's a large muscle. And of course we can clearly see it here. So here we're looking at the left pectoralis. And let's just isolate it so we can have a look at its structure. You can see that it has some connections to the underside of the clavicle. You can see it really is attached onto the sternum, and you can see how it comes over, and it actually crosses over to the lateral side of the humerus, and underneath you can see a groove that's running through there. That's actually the groove for the head of the biceps. So imagine that there's the head of the biceps is running through that groove that we can see here. The pectoralis major helps to partially hold the, not completely, but it does have a role in holding the head of the biceps within that groove. So that's the pectoralis major. Now let's back out. And let's look at some more. We have this number 12 on our list is the latissimus dorsi, and we have to go around to the back here. So latissimus dorsi, you can see very broad muscle. You can see how it comes off that big white area. That's called an aponeurosa. That's more connective tissue. So it's really strongly rooted into the back with this broad connective tissue attachment, and you can see it goes down towards the to the pelvis, and it doesn't quite wrap around in this view. So let's isolate it and let's have a look at it. So you can see latissimus dorsi. It has connections with some of the aponeurosa or some of the connective tissue associated with the vertebral column. You don't see it here. It looks like there's a gap down here, but that's because we haven't included the connective tissue, but there's that big connective tissue. And you can see how it crosses underneath the humerus and attaches onto the medial aspect of that groove on there. Okay, so that's the latissimus dorsi, quite a large muscle, very large muscle. Next one to look at would be the deltoid, and this is one most people know. There's a few muscles in the body that most people would be aware of. The deltoid, we can see that we have three parts to the deltoid. We have the clavicular part, which is being highlighted here, the clavicular, the deltoid, and also the scapular part. Very, very broad muscle. It covers much of the shoulder joint. And let's have a look at it in isolation. So once again, you can clearly see how it's up here. It has attachment to part of the clavicle. As we spin around, we can see the acromion there. That's the acromion. And you can see the spine of the scapula is one of its attachment points. As we head down, we can actually see that it's attached sort of mid-shaft onto the humerus. And there's usually a little bump there, a little deltoid tuberosity. And from below, you can really see how it covers and it envelops partly to the anterior surface of the joint, the lateral surface, the superior surface, and the posterior surface of that joint. So that is the deltoid. Let's have a look at the next one, which is the infraspinatus. Now that we should have a little clue as to what this one is, the infraspinatus. Now, in order to see it, we're going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to click right there, and you can see there's the infraspinatus. Let me hide the deltoid. I'm going to hide part of that so we can really see. So there's the infraspinatus, and of course the infraspinatus gets its name because it's inferior to the spine of the scapula, the infraspinatus. And once again, let's isolate it and have a look. You can see it's attached on to the greater tubercle of the humerus, and you can see that it's attached to the almost the medial boundary of the scapula, and you, of course, you can see it has attachments along the inferior aspect of that spine of the scapula. All right, so the next one would be the external intercostals. So if we're talking intercostals, we're talking about muscles between the ribs, and we're going to have a look inside. So I've removed one layer. So intercostals, costa for ribs, it tells us that it's associated with ribs, and intercostal also tells us that it's between the ribs. And if we can click here, we can see there's the external intercostals. And I'm going to zoom out a bit. So you can see, look at the fiber direction. Often it's described as sort of the fiber direction is, think about if you go to put your hands in the front pockets of your pants. That's sort of the same direction your fingers run as to the fiber direction. So the fiber directions start off superior, lateral, and move down inferior, medial. We've now moved around to the posterior aspect, and let's have a look. The next two muscles we're going to look at are the teres minor and the teres major. So here I've highlighted the teres minor, and you can see it just sort of peeks out between other muscle layers. So this would be the deltoid there. There's the infraspinatus. So basically the junction between the deltoid and the infraspinatus. The one that's tucked right in there is the teres minor. And let's isolate it and have a look. Now once again, you can see it runs from the scapula and it runs to the humerus. So this muscle, like many of the other muscles we've seen so far up in the shoulder region, are helping to stabilize the joint, allow for things like adduction, abduction, and all the movements of the arm are tied in with all these muscles that we're seeing in this video. All right, so if you're going to call something the teres minor, you can almost bet that there's going to be a teres major, and yes, there is. So just below it, just inferior to it, it's a much bigger muscle from the outside view. And here's the teres major, and let's isolate it. So you can see that it runs from more of an inferior aspect of the scapula, and once again it does run over to the humerus. So those are the two teres, the teres major and the teres minor. Now let's have a look at the over to the front. So we have a number of muscles in the trunk, and we have the rectus sheath, and I'm going to hide that, and we're going to head down below. And here we're looking at the rectus abdominis. You know, most people call this, their six-pack, right? So here's the rectus abdominis, and let's isolate it. You can see how it really runs. Now, one of the things we can't see up here is the full attachment, because we're not seeing all the connective tissue. But it's tied in with much of the connective tissue up in the costal sternal region, and it comes down to the part of the pelvis, almost at the area of the pubic symphysis. And of course, we're only looking at one half of it here. And so let's back out. So we can see, and we can see that I'll remove the sheath here also, and we can see there's the second half. So it's really both these make up the rectus abdominis. We have a right and left half of it. And then we have the external obliques. And let's go over here, and we can see the external obliques. Now look at the fiber direction. Once again, the fiber directions of the external obliques runs down. So it starts off higher towards the back, and it runs down towards the midline. And once again, it's sort of that analogy that the external abdominal obliques, the fiber direction is sort of, the analogy that's often used. It's like the direction of your fingers. If you go to put your whole hand into the front pocket of your pants, that's sort of the direction of the fiber, so that they run. All right, so now we have the serratus anterior. Now look at the name serratus. Serratus means serrated. Serrated means a jagged edge, and anterior. So it gives us an idea that there could be actually two serrati. And we're going to look at the serratus anterior. Now, in order to see it, we have to sort of look underneath the arm, and we can start to see there is the serratus anterior, highlighted there in yellow. And you can see why it gets its name. Now let me remove some of these muscles. Okay, there. So we remove the muscles, and you can see the serratus anterior. By the way, I just removed the pectoralis major, and just for as an FYI, it's not on your list. That's the pectoralis minor right there. So let's go back. Here's the serratus anterior, and if we wheel around, you can really see the serratus anterior has a number of those finger-like projections. So let's isolate it and have a look. It's quite a large muscle, and you can see that it is on the, it attaches to the medial surface of the scapula, but it's on the inside surface, the deeper surface of the scapula. And you can see how it reaches out and it attaches, all those finger-like projections attach onto different ribs. And you can really see why it's called serratus or serratus anterior, because of the serrated appearance of it. All right, so let's move on to the next one. And the next one is the trapezius. The trapezius is a fairly big muscle back here. And let's get a really good view of it. It's sort of diamond shaped. So here is part of the trapezius, and you can see there's different sections. And why are they broken up in sections? Because these fiber groups are working as a team. So you can see the fibers here are starting off low on the spinal column and moving high in that direction, right? Whereas here, the fiber directions are more horizontal. So you can see the various parts. So we have a descending part, we have the transverse part, and we also have the ascending part. And all three of these together make up the trapezius muscle. All right, so let's move on to the triceps brachii. Now, once again, this gives us a little clue. So brachii refers to arm. And remember, the arm really is the area between the shoulder joint and the elbow joint. So let's click on here and activate, and we can see here's one of the heads of the triceps. And so that was the lateral head. And here is the medial head. And there's also part of the medial head right there. So let's isolate this one. And here we go. So you can see where its attachment is. So up here you can see one of the attachments, one of the heads off to attach onto the scapula, and the other one up here onto the humerus. And if we look here, you can see part of the head that's highlighted here actually wraps around, and it's deep to the other parts of the head. And you can see how it comes in it, but it also is attaching onto the humerus. And if you look at it, you have three different sections to it. So triceps, three heads. We have the orange bit. You can see just above that, there are two other attachment points for the triceps. Now, as we're talking about the triceps, that also brings us into the biceps, which means two heads, and here is the biceps. Here is the long head, and here is the short head of the biceps. So together they make up the biceps. Now, if we look, we can see, and I'm going to get rid of this muscle here, which is called the platysma. I'm going to hide that one. We can actually see that the long head of the biceps actually attaches onto a bony landmark that you should know, which is the coracoid process. So that's the coracoid process. That's part of the scapula right up there. So this is the short head. And let's go to the long head. And the long head, you can see how the long head comes through that groove, the bicipital groove, and does head over to the scapula and attaches just above the cavity or the socket called the glenoid cavity or glenoid fossa. So we've seen the triceps. These two are the biceps at the front. Now we have another one, which is brachialis. And once again, this gives us a little clue. Brachium is arm, and brachialis. So let's have a look, and there it is. You can see the brachialis is really sort of sandwiched in between. So it's very lateral in its positioning, but it really is sandwiched between the biceps, which are at the front, that's the biceps, the triceps at the back, and here is the brachialis. All right, so we have one more to go, and that is the radio, or brachioradialis, I should say. So that also gives us a bit of a clue. So the first bit of the word is brachio, and the second part is radialis. So it tells us this is a muscle that's probably starting off up in the arm region, but also has something to do with the radius. And if we click, we can see there is the brachioradialis right there. You can see that most of this muscle is actually in the forearm. It starts off, yes, it does start off up here in the arm, but most of it is actually in the forearm. And let's isolate it so we can really see where it's going. And so up here you can see, yes, indeed, it does get the name brachio because it does attach up here in the brachium. And as we head down here, we can see down on this side it does attach onto the radius. So that's the brachioradialis. So that's a bit of a walkthrough just to give you a sense as to where some of these major muscles are that are in our lab book. You really have to spend time, go through it, look at diagrams, look at various diagrams, use some of these muscle model programs, and we've talked about which ones are available in class. So the biggest thing I can say is take your time. This does take time. You really have to invest the time in order to learn these. And we'll see you in the next video.